All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the first book club meeting of 2020, at least for the Unicorn Project. So hopefully everyone had a chance to read part 2. And so I guess first impressions, what do people think?
So I walked out of the last meeting right towards the end. We were talking about Sarah and her role in this. And I thought this section was really interesting because Sarah played not an active role, but her, I wouldn't say she was in part 2 a lot, but her presence was felt a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Weirdly, I don't actually think she makes an appearance at all in the book, in the sense that she's never in any of the rooms or ever discussing anything. It's always Sarah has said this or Sarah has approved this, which was interesting because obviously that means that they never did go out for lunch. So I can't remember who bet on what, but they haven't gone out for lunch yet.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to get that question answered.
But yeah, no, Sarah's obviously, I feel like Sarah's using her, if the weird thing is in this book, I would say that it seems like Sarah's using her influence a lot more positively than she was in the Phoenix Project. It felt very negative in the Phoenix Project, and it does seem to be a lot more positive, albeit fairly minor. Like, it seems like she's just kind of going along with what Maggie says, I think it is.
Yeah, it did feel weird sort of rooting a little bit for Sarah because like you almost felt like she was doing the right things and like getting the rebellion what they needed, and you're like, oh wait, this is so contrary to how I felt about her in the Phoenix Project, which is completely negative. No redemptive qualities at all.
Yeah. So yeah, it was. I think it's like, yeah. My opinion of Sarah has slightly changed. I guess. Yeah, it's quite nice. I guess she's slightly in the better books now.
Well, I think this is a great reminder that like we're all on the same team, right? There are some times where we have to work with people who have competing interests, but at the end of the day, like we all want to see the company succeed. We all want to be successful, and I think this like Sarah narrative arc that we're seeing now in part 2 of the book is that manifested in a way that if you read the Phoenix Project, you never saw.
Derek, what do you think of Sarah? I think you're one of the only ones who hasn't read the Phoenix.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Correct me if I'm wrong. This takes place at the exact same time, right, as the other book, right? Yeah. So.
Yep.
Yeah, there should be a timeline that shows both books in the appendix of that one.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't really have much of an opinion at the moment. We were kind of have not much of a cliffhanger, I guess. Okay. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, Maggie's obviously kind of seems to be the one kind of more so than Sarah seems to be the one kind of validating and letting things occur as the rebellion essentially wants, I guess. But
yeah, me personally, I think that if Sarah was the bad guy of the previous story, Maggie is now the good person in the story. I love Maggie. She's authoritative. She's got power. She knows how to use it, and she just gets stuff done. And I like that.
Yeah, I will say I like that, and I would assume one of those examples that you're kind of referring to is like if someone has, they need to now do X, but they have Y, Z, elemental P still to do. Well, I'll figure out Y, Z, elemental P, and I'll get that off your plate. So those people that can do that, that's obviously very useful.
Yeah, and I think the thing I have more respect for is a lot of the other people in the story are getting stuff done, but they're all part of the rebellion, whereas Maggie isn't actually part of the rebellion until right at the end of part 2. So it's like she's doing this without the knowledge that they're all kind of working together as well. So yeah, I like that. Like,
this is kind of a random question, but how many people are at the dockside now? Feels like there's a good chunk of people there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's going to become like Contribute. They're going to have to hire a hotel soon, I think.
I'm curious. The feature freeze seems to be not as dramatic as I expected it to be. So in the Phoenix project, we are seeing things from not the developer perspective, right? Like when you read that, it's very much from the leadership perspective. And in a lot of ways, I would say this is because so much of it is being told from Maxine's perspective, it is that engineering kind of IC perspective. When we are presented with the feature freeze in the Phoenix project, it's very like, to the business. And here, I'm curious, does it come off that way to anyone else when you're reading it? Like, how do you feel the feature freeze is being presented in the Unicorn project?
My only comparison, I think, was the Phoenix project, where it did seem more like they were freaking out on the business side. But to your point, actually, oddly enough, it does seem a little calm on the Unicorn project in comparison. You just expected more complaining, more people banging on doors, or people calling Brent all the time. That was a big thing in the Phoenix project. You know, they were like, no, get my feature done, get my feature done.
I get the sense that there's a lot more people ignoring the feature freeze as well in the Unicorn project, in terms of there's a lot of development managers. I think there's a passing statement to it, but it's like, like some development managers are just like, oh, actually, this is a brilliant chance for me to kind of catch up, even though I'm not really. That's not the point of it, but yeah, like.
Yeah, I think that seemed to be more of an excuse, right? Like they can get all the stuff done that they wanted to get done, right? Development, productivity stuff, and and not have to develop new features. Because I think somewhere early on they talked to one of the developers, and she talked to one of the developers and said like, yeah, I don't really care. I just kind of do my feature, I check it in, and then. Like, I don't even know when it goes into production, like months later, I just work on the next feature. Like, and there's just this like revolving door of like feature to feature to feature and no follow through. And the freeze kind of gave excuse to free up like all those resources to start doing what they ended up doing at the end of section 2, right? Like that auto deploy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's different.
They treated it more as an excuse, right? It was like just, oh yeah, now we have some time, instead of at least in this book, versus Phoenix project, which was more like you said, impact to the business. And
I think the book's written in a way as well, in so much that you're not really aware of the feature freeze so much as you're aware it's going on. But this book seems to focus so much on the data hub team, because that's what they've become, that the feature hub the feature freeze is going on, but it's kind of just this thing in the background, whereas it was kind of this all-encompassing thing that was going on in the Phoenix project. It was the story, if you like.
Yeah, I don't have obviously the comparison between the books, but obviously at the beginning of the section 2, the feature freeze thing, that's kind of obviously a big deal, but then it just kind of faded into the background, to your point, Simon. Like, I was kind of expecting that to be just even a conversation piece. It seemed like it wasn't even talked about really, again, to be honest, for probably the 70%.
The only thing it really
of the section 2 or something.
I think the only thing it's really doing in this story is allowing engineers on other teams to suddenly become free to kind of come and help.
That makes sense.
That's probably all it's really doing.
Yeah, I think it exposes too that. Sorry, I think it exposes too that while a developer might finish their feature and ship it off to testing, that there's another bottleneck and they have to go solve that problem. So it kind of helps move the story along to, you can develop all day and close out issue, but they're just going to sit in testing or in deployment or wherever the next bottleneck is until they get out. So while the business may have been freaking out about a feature freeze, from a developer perspective, they could have just never told them. The end result could have been the same because of the further bottlenecks, and because of that, just throw it over the wall mentality.
Yeah, and speaking of bottlenecks, I think that reminds me of the one where Maxine does the analysis of how like tickets and like 2% is spent in development because there were so many like
2.5,
questions not answered by the product manager. Was one of those like, and so with the way Maggie like was like, nope, you're gonna sit next to the developers, and I was like, yes, Maggie laying down the law.
Yeah,
there was a really subtle shift in that I noticed as a product manager, where that person was a product manager until they came and they sat with the team and they became a product owner. And in the product management space, there is a big discussion going on about the difference in those roles, about like a seniority thing, even of product managers are above product owners. That's just the way that the hierarchy works in a lot of orgs. And so it was interesting to see that shift in title, even though the role is probably the same. But for that person to change title, like in that sentence, was really jarring to me as a product person. I mean, that being said, I love sitting with teams.
Really, though, I love sitting in my home office.
Yeah. Drinking nice coffee. Yeah, so one of the things I quite liked the fact is that they kind of made a passing reference to the fact that the Data Hub team are using kind of like loads of different technologies and really archaic stuff. Some of it, I can't remember exactly. Oh, they were saying some of it was in like Java servlets or applets, weren't they? And they were using some pretty old technologies, and they were just a mishmash of all this kind of stuff. And I like the fact that none of the solutions to their problems have been, let's rewrite it in a new shiny language, because actually it doesn't make any difference, because their problems are so much bigger than what it's written in. And actually, I really like the fact that it's a programming problem, but it's not a programming problem. It's not a programming language problem anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. You half expected like someone to be like, yeah, let's rewrite in this new shiny framework. And
yeah, I think
I kind of had it. I'm sorry. Good.
Yeah, you can go for it. Actually, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Oh, I was sorry about that. No, I was just thinking like, I actually felt in this book like they pushed more technologies. Like it felt like a sales pitch for certain new technologies. Like, I don't know. I thought it was, I can't point to the specific references, but like where they were really pushing Docker, like a sales pitch, and then something about functional programming and like it.
Yeah, that is true.
I
did notice that.
These like technologies, like, and it seemed very strange for a book. Like how long would that, like, could that last, right? Like, Docker's a thing now, but like Phoenix Project felt way more neutral, at least what I remember of it from years ago. But now it feels like they picked a couple very specific technologies, and they were just like, and this is why Docker is so amazing. And Docker and
I don't think that they're selling Docker so much as what Docker solves as a problem. So that Docker solves that it runs on my machine type style thing, and all they're basically saying is Docker is a tool. And that's how I read it anyway. Like Docker is the current tool that's used to
totally.
It runs here, but it doesn't run here, and why is that? So Docker solves that. I mean, when they talk about CI/CD, they don't mention a specific CI/CD tool at that point.
True. Yes, I was kind of listening
CI/CD,
for and source code management and things like that. But yeah, and maybe that's why. Maybe I was like specifically listening for like, ooh, are they gonna mention the source code management system or anything else? And they didn't. But then there were certain things that they just were like hammering on. It felt weird. Like I don't know.
I could see that, having recently read Phoenix Project, that Phoenix Project was more neutral from like I think it'll age better, whereas like the Unicorn Project will date itself a little bit because it does make references to these things.
Your point, Brad. It's very name droppy. Is kind of how it feels.
Yeah. Was there a search thing? I'm trying to remember now, like a big data search or something like that. I thought they were, getting big on or something too. I can't remember. There was a couple of commercial projects.
Tableau and a couple of the data tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did notice that they mentioned Tableau by name, and I hadn't drawn that common thread until just now, Brad. So I really appreciate you saying that, because in my mind, I mean, yes, Tableau is used in lots of companies throughout the world, but I think of it as outdated technology. There are just so many other things that do something very similar and are a lot better and easier to use and newer technology and blah, blah, blah. But I hadn't drawn that common thread until just now. So I think that I think that you're correct in saying this is not going to age as well as the Phoenix Project has. But maybe that's the problem with sequels always.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that as well. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely agree. They do name drop quite a lot of specific technologies there that they don't in the
and more
Phoenix
pop
Project.
culture references. Like I think they in part 2 there was the Gandalf, I think Lord of the Rings reference.
Yeah, there's a Gandalf one,
Yeah.
and then the bridge crew they've now added in the org chart at the beginning. So it's like, there's a fair few like references going on.
So the one place where they do talk about specific technologies that I thought painted a picture really well was with that committee. And I can't remember what it's called, but there's that committee that approves new technologies.
Oh, the LARB or the TEPA, whatever.
Yeah.
LARB, yeah.
An acronym that does.
TEPLARB. Well, the LARB approves the TEP.
That is so reminiscent of so many like previous things I've worked on where you have to go and like kind of get it approved by like a board of senior people, and basically their job is just to say no. It's like I'd like to upgrade the base operating system we're using from Windows 3.1. No, it's 2012. No, okay, fine.
And when they rejected them for wanting some of those new technology, something. Please, we will reconvene, and it was just like very like the Senate, like we will reconvene in 90 days to re-review your TEP. It's just funny.
Yeah, that one was painful, having been through like an architecture review like that, where the team of architects reviews a blueprint and gives your delivery team thumbs up, thumbs down. Did that at a previous company, but like the experience of presenting and like hearing those war stories from developers was really familiar. But we had a great system where they met twice a week and they met for hours, and it was just really it was a due diligence thing of, have you worked through, done the thought exercise, thought about security, thought about load, thought about all the things that you're going to need to do to really operate this. But yeah, that would, I can't imagine we'll be back in 6 weeks and reevaluate.
It was 6 months.
Situation, and that's why we're rejecting your plan. Oh.
Yeah, it was months.
brutal.
Yeah, that's obviously why there's a whole like thread throughout everything of the fear culture thing, right? Like everything's so slow, and then everyone has just gotten used to this is the way things are, and it is so bad. Obviously, as Maxine is gradually digging deeper and deeper as she hits each of these new bottleneck points, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is so much more worse than I thought it was, and it's obviously extremely painful, like cringing as you go through this. It's pretty wild.
I mean, the other thing I really hated about the LARB experience was like, they're just like, no, see you in 6 months. They didn't give you any kind of like, come back in 6 months with this, and this, and we'll approve it, or your next steps, your next course of action should be to talk to this person, so we can approve it next time. It was just like, no, see you in 6 months. And it was just, they had this kind of weird thing where they were like, things might have changed in 6 months and we'll reevaluate. It's like, well, you haven't given us any goals, anything to aim for. Yeah, I hated that. I really hated it.
Does anyone here watch The Good Place? No?
Yes.
My wife does. I've seen a few. Yeah.
Well, okay, this is not a list. So there's this one quote where basically one of the characters deals with the committee, and he says, the Titanic is sinking and they want to write a strongly worded letter to the iceberg. And I feel like a lot of time with these committees, it feels like that. Like something is wrong. We need to do something. But like they want to spend all this time reviewing stuff and just, twiddling their thumbs.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with reviewing per se. I think the point that James made earlier that they want to make sure you thought through what the side effects are is really important, and it's a great one, and the principles are there. But I think this is where like we don't need to get into a room to do this together. We can write things down and read it on our own schedules and give feedback. Like that's one of the things that changes the way you work, and things can go so much more quickly that way. You don't need to present to 6 people. 3 of the 6 can weigh in, and that's the kind of thing that makes things go faster, also removes this bureaucracy feel to things.
Yeah, I thought there was a good allusion to that write it down, think it through later on, where Maxine talks about a former CEO she worked with who wrote white papers, and his quote of, how are you going to know how the business works if you don't understand it? I thought that was really interesting of like, you need to think through these things, and a lot of times write them down and be thoughtful about it and take that time early on to understand the business processes later.
Yeah, that reminds me, actually, as I understand it, that's what they do at Amazon, right? I believe that's a very big part of their culture is like,
yeah, there's 6-pagers.
Yeah, something like that. I just remember hearing something like that. So it is like, again, it's basically, it's an explicit set of time where you have to take your time. It kind of slows you down and you have to think and put it to page. Like it's a good.
Why is it called the 6-pager?
I don't know why they call it a 6-pager, but it's something about a 6-page. It's not the press release. Press release, I think, is a different thing, but it's basically a 6-page strategy doc. I've used those at other places as well. Our
Gotcha.
product vision pages are actually a good distillation of that. That like, here's the strategy for this category. We've sat down, we've thought about it, we've written it down, and this is how we're going to go execute on that. So that's a good practice.
Cool. I didn't actually. So what I was thinking of, so what I've heard of is with respect to meetings, I think. So basically all before a meeting, there's a written, essentially agenda, and everyone I think even in the meeting, you take the first X amount of time to everyone read it or something.
Yeah, they do that with, with some stuff too.
Cool. So obviously they use it in more than one way, which is just reinforcing how they find value in it.
In the beginning of the section, she was, sorry, I was flipping back to the book. Maxine, she went into the actual store, right? And she spent some time with end users and all these things. I thought that was really, I thought that was really keen in terms of her learning, what the rest of the business was about, some of the end user pain, and how she, wanted to bring that back to all the product managers and developers and things like that, people who kind of develop in a vacuum but never see what the end result was. And the end result was they didn't use any of that stuff. Like iPads were stuck in the corner, like they just fill out fake data for I don't know if it was VIN numbers or whatever, and just completely not usable. So it just re-emphasized how much effort that they were putting into features and stuff that were never used, not executed, like zero feedback, no feedback loops. So I thought that was kind of a cool part of the whole, like it was almost like a side story, but it contributed.
Yeah. Good.
Go for it, Ben.
Oh no, I was gonna say, as a developer, I felt the pain of being like, I prefer a paper manual and looking up tables than this software. I was like, oh, that hurts.
Yeah, to tack onto that, it's like she found like at least 3 or 4 like golden nuggets. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. Like, oh my gosh. And then obviously digging into like, why are you doing it this way? And I think one of the reasons was like a super old school terminal or something like that, where if you know it, it's extremely efficient, but if you don't, they don't leverage it or whatever. I think that was for the VIN number, but anyway, yeah, a lot of gold nuggets just by like actually being there. And that's something that works across the board. Like that's something we need to do better with Meltano, even, for example. Like,
yep,
you learn a lot just by
spending time with customers and people who use it.
I had a previous job where we were making software for like individuals, productivity software, and everyone had to do support every couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And you would, spend a week answering support tickets and answering the questions that would come in from customers. And it was a really great way for you to, we all use the software every day, but it's a different perspective on it. Like I used it in English, which is the language it was built in, but it was also localized, and customers would have feedback on localizations and things like that sometimes don't even cross our mind when we're building software. I wonder if there's a way to help people get on the front lines. I don't know what a better way to say that is, to like.
I think probably the closest we have is probably the customer advocates and the TAMs, basically, for us, you know, as an organization, people who are currently using the software and have technical account managers who go in and figure out what pain points they're having. I guess the support team as well, of course.
Yeah, I would say from a product perspective and interacting with customers, GitLab is one of the easiest places that I've worked with to get in front of a customer, either through the TAMs or the account managers, or going into the forums, or going into the issues, or going out to Twitter. I mean, there's a ton of ways that we can interact with users, and through the internal folks with customers, actually buyers of the software. And so you get a lot of different perspective that way of how everybody from an individual user who's just using .com free to someone with 5,000 seat license is using the product differently and the different kind of problems that they're having.
I think at a high level too, it's worth mentioning the whole dog fooding aspect, right? Like,
yeah,
that was something that just inherently, like with respect to GitLab growing initially, right? Like it was a super small team, but then the contributor team was massive, right? In terms of the open source community. So like they were just dog fooding and they're like, let's fix this. And like that, there's a lot of value in that as well. And we have a unique product in GitLab specifically, right? Where it is very developer centric and there's a lot of developers. So like that in itself has helped. I can speak to, you know, certain products I've worked on in the past where I'm not as interested in like the domain, and that makes it harder, right? And I would imagine other people have had a similar experience.
I've definitely encountered, I'm just going to bring us back to the book slightly. And there's one thing in the book that I've definitely encountered, and it's definitely happened to me in a previous company. And I'll explain what it was in a second. But there's a bit in the book where they realized there's a massive Severity 2 incident. And they basically, Maxine's working with Tom, isn't she? And they're working together and they get it fixed instantly. And then he's like, oh, and now we wait. And she's like, well, what the hell's going on? And he's like, yeah, well, we've got to wait for like QA to look at it, and then maybe it will get put into the next production run. And she's like, how long is that going to take? And he's like, a few days if it's a Sev 1, but because it's Sev 2, maybe a couple of weeks. And she's like, what? That I have had. I used to work for a gambling company, and we had on-site, on-prem machines that had to be updated physically with a USB stick. So there'd be an issue and you'd fix it in code, and it's like, well, it might get rolled out in the next 6 to 12 months, maybe. Yeah, like, so I can speak from experience how much that hurts. I can begin to imagine how painful that would be going back to something like that. And it's all to do with the fact that it's all siloed, you know, like QA, ops. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
No, I think that's like the pinnacle of the problem statement, right? Like that's when she has the most breakdown. Maxine does is like when, yeah, there's all these problems with the build. They're early on. Okay, it's not documented well. It's like things we've all kind of lived through. But then like that seems to be her major breaking point. Like she brought in donuts, right? Because it was release day or something, right?
Yeah.
And she was so excited, but then like she went home. I think she went home and said like she just, you know, kicked the dog because she was so frustrated with work or something like that, because it just totally popped her bubble.
Yeah, I think she was really struggling at one point. I think she was starting to lose a bit of motivation when she realized that release or testing day was not exactly what she'd envisioned.
That's what it was. Yeah,
testing day. Yeah.
My mind.
Yeah. I mean, and that, dare I say it, like, also, there wasn't any automated testing from the sounds of it. They just, because this QA department existed, it was almost like the developers were like, oh, we're just going to write our code, not bother automated testing it, and then we're just going to ship it off because there's a QA department and they deal with that. And it's almost like, because there was that weird separation between QA and dev, it was just like, oh, that's their responsibility. Let them test it. And
was it in part 2 where there was, I think it was Ron, the QA manager, who like testing is our job. Like, don't worry about it. It's ours. Don't try to be taking my people. That was so painful.
Oh yeah, that was part 2. He got really annoyed. Yeah, he thought they were trying to take their jobs away by automating the tests. It's like, oh my god, no! Like,
you're very smart people. We want you to use your brains, not be clicking buttons over and over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that idea of like, let me build my job security by not automating my task seems so selfish.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, like, because at a high level, you're going backwards, like just from a whole career arc, anything. You're just like delaying an inevitable of some kind. But people have different motivations. But yeah, that's very, very scary. The what I thought was kind of interesting with respect to the testing too is actually in Word docs, if I remember correctly, like the step-by-step things they had to do too. It was like that itself was painful because then it was like a shared drive, and it's like just again kind of just going back to all the little technology examples. It's like it made sense for a time, and that, you know, and then it's painful to change, but over time that adds up a lot, and that's again where they are currently, very much in debt.
Weirdly, I think the whole like automating the test suite actually goes back to the psychological safety aspect. It's people worrying about themselves losing their own jobs, and it's like, you're not going to lose your job by automating the tests. It's going to give you more time to be more efficient and have better value. You know, like like Ben said, you know, we don't pay you to click the same box every day, you know, for 7 days a week, you know, because we can automate that. You know, like, you're definitely better spent doing something else. But yeah, it's the fact that they might lose their job because that's how they see it, isn't it? You know,
there's been an interesting discussion. I'm in the IT Rev book club as well for the book, and somebody asked the question early on about what people thought about the third ideal of the improvement of daily work, and it's been really interesting to talk about, like, how far do you take that? When do you do that? There's also discussion about being effective versus efficient, or like being busy versus being effective or getting outcomes. And it seems like that the way that character is written, Ron, is it's all about, well, I'm busy, so clearly I'm doing my job. Why are you trying to, you know, people are doing their work over here, that clearly, versus the outcomes are getting better and we're becoming more effective as a group through automation.
Yeah, people who wear meetings as a point of pride, like,
yeah. The best line, though, in the whole book is the joke, what do you call a group of developers? Emerge conflict.
Emerge conflict.
I
love that.
That's the first time I heard that, actually. Yeah, I agree.
It was so good. I messaged one of my developer buddies that one, and he was like, I'm guessing you're pulling my leg because clearly, like, it's developers. I'm like, no, it's this. And he's like, oh my god, that's hilarious. So yeah, that was literally my highlighted line as well.
The merge war room, though, man, that sounded awful. I mean, I've been in places where it's like, hey, you can start merging your branches on this day. And we always joked, merge early, merge often, so you don't have to fix conflicts, but nothing like that. That sounded insane.
Did it end up, I didn't actually really count how long it ended up taking, but it was about like a 3-day affair in the end, wasn't it? It was
that was longer.
Just the people carrying files around on USB drives, and there being like spreadsheets of things that needed to be merged, and like
printing source code out.
And then in the midst of all that, a Sev1 incident where someone who needs to deploy the code can't do it because the person who needs to deploy the code is on lunch break. And then all he does is come in, copy your code across and put it into his branch and press commit. It's like, because the developers aren't trusted.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah. That was probably the lowest point in the book, I think, for me. Merge war room and that happening. I was just like,
so you've seen that before? I thought that was like dramatic. I had never actually seen or heard of something like that before.
We were on 2-week sprints, and it was a 3-week release cycle. You had 2 weeks of development and then a week of testing and release. And like that Friday before the testing would start would be hey, the release branch is now merged back, you can start merging to master, or merging to the test branch. I don't remember what the exact branching strategy was, but yeah, and like the minute that developers walked in on my team, they would start merging stuff because we were all getting in early and just beat the rush, get your stuff done.
God.
Yeah,
No, I
mean,
think I have to be honest, I've never been as part of that kind of level. The worst I think I've ever experienced was back in the days of Microsoft SourceSafe being like the go-to SCM. And you had to lock files when and the problem you'd have is people would lock directories, and you'd just be sat there twiddling your thumbs waiting for the directory to become available to make your change. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I've dealt with in the past, but that's probably about as bad as it's. I've never worked in a large enough team which doesn't merge often enough to encounter that issue. Emily's face.
I have anxiety just thinking about it.
Yeah. SourceSafe was not
we
good.
made it through. Yeah, SourceSafe is. Ooh.
I mean, it just comes to mind again, another props to Sid of like, trying to reinforce these core simple things like, merge early and often and small commits and all that kind of thing. Like, it sounds so simple, but it has so much value over the long term. And it's like,
and it's in everything we do as well. I mean, even, Git flow versus GitLab flow. GitLab flow is probably taking that merge early and often again ethos even more extreme than just Git flow does. So again, it's sort of in everything we do really, and I completely understand why.
So what other questions do folks not have answered after this section, or what are you looking forward to being resolved most in the third part?
For me, I'm actually curious what Emily's take on this, but I was expecting more data stuff to happen because they're on the data team, and it seems like the meat of data has not really been addressed. Like, they refer to a little bit that they have multiple APIs and like data is unclean, but like there were maybe like a few sentences devoted to data, and I kind of wondering if they're gonna get any further into that.
Yeah, I had really similar questions because everything I read leading up to this, and especially like the circles on the internet where this book kind of came on my radar, really pushed like, oh man, it's all about data and data teams. And I just don't feel like that's the case. I feel like this is about an engineering team, which is fine, and like it's a great book so far. We've heard of the data warehousing team, but I don't even feel like we've met anyone on the data warehousing team. And the data hub team is separate from the data warehousing team. Like for the first part, I don't think we heard about the data warehousing team. And so I thought like the data hub team was the data warehousing team. Now I've come to find out they're separate things, but yeah, I'm a little, like I'm really interested to see if the data warehousing team is going to be a part of this last third at all. And if so, how they're going to fit. But like the book seems so centered around the work that Maxine and the data hub team are doing that I'm not confident that that is going to be the case. I mean,
yeah.
I think there's going to be a fair bit of data involved in this next bit with the promotions team because they're talking about funnels of data and like.
Yeah, so yes, it's about data, but like all software is about how you present data, right? That's really different from data warehousing, which is about the presentation of like aggregated information to drive business insights. So to use the promotions example a little bit further, like, yes, I think what we're about to see is the experience for the marketing team of creating and implementing promotions is about to get a lot easier. And that's going to go through the data hub team. But in terms of data warehousing, like what I would expect to see is, then there is going to be reporting on this live, and we can compare that to, and that's just something that's handled by a different team than the team that's making it easier to implement promotions. And I feel like the book is about the former, but I was under the impression it was going to be about the latter.
Be interested to see. Maybe it's in part 3, who knows?
I have just a general observation. I think I'm wrong, but I've got a couple vibes where they're obviously improving processes and making a lot of improvements, but the fact that they're still kind of their own team, they're kind of recreating their own silo, and I feel like that's going to turn in and end up hurting them somehow. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, I guess. But
yeah, so I know what you're saying. I think
the VPs are supporting it makes me that's probably not true. But I still feel like somehow that they're still creating their own silo, and then there's gonna be maybe so much to still overcome, or that they actually end up causing more problems somehow, or some other adjacent problems that they didn't anticipate or something.
Yeah, my most interesting thing for part 3 is how they roll out these changes to the rest of the organization. That's the most interesting thing I'm interested in, because I think they will realize the value, I think, fairly obviously. But I'm interested to see how they adopt it throughout the rest of the organization.
So yeah, conceptually, here's a prototype, maybe even a production prototype, if you will. Here it's working. Now, how do we scale that, right? That's basically I think.
Yeah, because they've just basically taken responsibility for running the production environment of the data hub. I'm wondering if that's how, every team is going to run their own environment.
Yeah, we'll own it. We'll maintain it. Does that mean we'll have a pager? I remember, I think Tom maybe said that. It's very real. It's different.
Yeah, I wonder too if companies go through this ebb and flow where what we're seeing right now happens, there's total team ownership, and then kind of leadership changes, and people are we all don't want to carry pagers. Why don't we centralize this? And then it gets centralized, and then suddenly testing also gets centralized, and then things move to this central model, and then you do that for a little bit. You're oh, this isn't working. Let's push ownership back down. I've read a couple books where I've seen that ebb and flow, and I wonder where the middle ground is. If there is one, or what the...
Maybe we'll find out. I think one of the things, the other thing that we didn't mention is there's a bit in the book where it says about feature freezes being a common trait of most successful companies, which was interesting. And they were sort of saying, and I didn't actually know this, but this is apparently, they used the example of Nokia being a company that didn't basically pay off their technical debt and stop and think about it. And I didn't actually really, obviously I know a bit of the story about Nokia, but I didn't actually know the full story about Nokia. And that was actually really interesting to read. I didn't know if you guys picked up on that particularly.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. I forgot about that too. Yeah, I think it was if I remember correctly, it was 2 days to get a Symbian build up or whatever it was. And then essentially that just comes back to the whole idea of having a fast feedback cycle, right? And that's essentially what the whole rebellion is doing, is finding ways to have more feedback quicker. It's really what it comes down to.
All right, it looks like we're at time, folks.
Yep. Any final thoughts before we hop off? All right, so our next meeting is scheduled for
2 weeks today, isn't it?
Yep. And that'll be the last part 3 and epilogue. So the 21st.
Fantastic.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining today.
Me
See you
too.
later.
See ya.
Bye.